I don't know that Becky needs an introduction, but as our commissioner to the Upper Colorado River Commission, the governor's representative, Becky plays a very key role in how our state is represented and how the 7 states and the feds hopefully reach an agreement. And so Becky is a tireless advocate for Colorado and works extremely hard. She even manages to piss off the lower basin just about every day she talks. So maybe that's okay. She's also out there looking for solutions. We're going to have just a few moments to be able to talk, so I want to get right into it. One of the questions I want to have this opportunity, Becky, to talk with you and ask you some questions. You know, I touched on it a little bit in my presentation, and then we heard Jay Weiner talk. And by the way, I really appreciate Jay coming up. Clearly, Jay and I don't always agree on things, but it is important to have good relations with people who you don't agree with and to be able to talk through things. So there is a big push. There was a push from Mr. Buchatsky from Arizona that we up here in Colorado and the other upper basin states have mandatory cuts in water use to deliver that water outside of our state lines. And I can tell you that our state government, from our perspective as a watchdog of Western water, we are not part of the state government, to be clear about that. Our state doesn't have the authority to do that. Our Constitution and our statutes say that the only time they can curtail water for out-of-state deliveries on the Colorado River is if and when the Upper Colorado River Commission, which Becky sits on, determines that we are in or in imminent threat of violating our obligations under the 1922 Compact. And that is the only time that our state can curtail water and our water use mandatorily without compensation. And at least that's our perspective at the River District. But I wanted to ask Becky, she's in the room, she's hearing these demands, she's responding to them. I think it's important to give Becky an opportunity to speak on that point. So, Becky?
Thank you. And I think mandatory cuts should be a 4-letter word. Cuts is, I guess, but we deal with that. And so I think when I hear folks talk about they must be mandatory cuts, there must be mandatory cuts in the Upper Basin, I think it's a misunderstanding of how we work. And so you saw Andy brought up some facts, and I think as we think about the future, facts are important. And so I want to talk about some facts. Does anybody have a calculator handy? I know those are old tools. Jay, do you have a calculator handy? I'm sure you will, but that's okay. Well, somebody get a calculator handy if you can. Check my numbers. So there is an allocation of water in the Upper Basin and the Lower Basin of 7.5 million acre feet. We have not developed. The one thing that we got in the compact was the ability to develop at our own pace. At our own pace. Currently, our demand is about 5.2 million acre feet annually. So that represents about 69% of the allocation. 69% of the allocation is our current demand. We don't normally use that. Why? Because it's not there. We can't. The mean of what we use is generally between 3.9 and 4.9 million acre feet. It's not because we don't have a demand for it. It's not because there's not water rights for it, paper rights, whatever you want to call them. It's because it is not there. And so I want to talk about that. So we'd love to use the 5.2 million acre feet. If it was there, we would. And if 7.5 was there and we had developed the demands for it, we would use it. But it's not. So we've never said we're going to develop beyond what the river says we can. The river dictates that. And so we're limited by that. So our range is typically 3.9 to 4.9 million acre feet in use. That represents about 52 to 65% of the allocation, that 7.5 million acre foot allocation. That's about what we use in general. So some recent years, we use, in 2020, 4.85 million acre feet. Jay, do you know what that represents of our demand? Well, it represents about 93% of our demand. That's on the, and so in a good year for us, we're still taking 7%. In a great year, that's a great year for us. We're still taking 7%. Then what did I say the other number of the mean was? About 3.9, right? That's what happens. So what does that represent? Well, that represents about 52% of the allocation, 75% of our demand. So 25% we're cutting because of prior appropriation. Because of prior appropriation. What does that mean? How many here in this room have a water right? Raise your hand if you have a water right. How many in this room have been able to fully fill that water right this year? One. Is that because you willingly put that on the table? If it's yes, please yell out yes. That's mandatory. How many of you love when the state engineer comes to your backyard? How many of you love that? When I hear folks say, if the upper basin does not put mandatory cuts on the table, yeah, I'm pissed. And you should be too. And I know you are. Because it's offensive. And so when I say there's a misunderstanding of how we operate, I believe it's a deliberate misunderstanding. Because if you choose not to see other people's pain, you are choosing that deliberately. I am not making a choice to not look at the pain that we see in the lower basin. There will be pain. Prior appropriation is pain. There is a priority system in the lower basin. Just like there's a priority system in the upper basin. It may look a little bit different, but we haven't perished because we figured it out. We haven't perished because we have adapted. I'm going to leave it at that because I don't want to say any four-letter words.
No, I think that's great, Becky. And I would just add to that, you know, there's the prior appropriation doctrine, but there's also a number of our high country irrigators and actually even some of our urban systems that have something that the lower basin has not experienced until very recently, and that is the physical unavailability of water on a regular basis. They have a water right on paper, but it doesn't ever materialize during dry years because it's not physically there, right? And it isn't even our state engineer that cuts it off. It's just not physically there. And that's something that the lower basin, for the most part, has not had to deal with at all until very recently. And what we're asking in the upper basin is, hey, we don't want to see you perish. We don't want you to cause us to perish. So please live within the physical supply that's present in the river. And I will just say, you know, Arizona is a classic example of this. They saw this crisis coming, and for the 10 years before the shortages were implemented in the lower basin, they took 300 to 500,000 acre feet a year out of the Colorado River, out of Lake Mead, through the Central Arizona Project, and dumped it into the ground. That's not a beneficial use of water. They think it is. The beneficial use of water when it's taken out and applied to a human or environmental use. And by the way, they're not sure they can get that water out, but they did it anyway because they were hoarding an asset from the entire community, because they could see the time where the prior appropriation system was going to kick in and hurt their junior right. And now they're looking upstream and saying, Colorado, you need to cut your uses. So that's why I think you hear a little bit of anger in Becky's voice on that. And I think it's really important to understand that. Doesn't mean that we don't want to work with them. Doesn't mean that we don't need to find a common solution. But we all have to recognize the actions that lead to these kind of policy decisions. I want to change a little bit. I touched on the conserved consumptive use concepts and our position over at the River District and our interest in protecting agriculture and the communities. I wanted to give Commissioner Mitchell a chance to talk about that. She's part of the Upper Colorado River Commission that put a conservation pool on the table and said, we will rise to the challenge. And so it would be good to get an update, Becky, from you on what's going on there and what can our water users here expect to see from our state. Are you on board with some sideboards? How do we do this right? All of those kind of questions.
Well, I think Colorado has led the charge on this. And there are a couple reasons why I think that. One is we started thinking about this in 2018 after DCP and really started focusing on demand management feasibility. And we looked at that. And there was a lot that came out of that. A lot of concerns, a lot of considerations. It was still ripe for conversation. How I know that is because then it came up for a broader discussion, a more open and even more open and more transparent discussion through the drought. What was the Senate bill? I'm trying to remember what it was. The Drought Task Force with Senate Bill 295. And that had representatives from across the state still talking about the concerns. There are concerns. Andy and I's relationship had probably been most tested with system conservation. And rightfully so. Why was it tested? I'm in a hard spot. We needed to put something on the table. Andy is a great defender of the Western Slope and had the concerns with that. There was a collision of interest. It was probably one of the hardest decisions that I have ever made in my work life, was to move forward with that. And part of the reason was because I don't think we had everything resolved that we needed to be able to do that. But we went forth because Colorado has never said we're not part of the solution. Colorado has never said we're not willing. Never, ever have we said we're not willing. But what we are not willing to do is to sacrifice ourselves to save others who should be choosing to save themselves, which I know they've put some water in the ground. They've prepared for these days. We need to make sure that what we do is not for status quo. We need to make sure that what we're doing doesn't create a scenario where others don't have to make decisions. And we need to make sure that we make decisions that don't lessen our value. We also need to make decisions that don't disproportionately have impact across the state, whether it's by area or industry. We need to keep that in mind. That is what we have learned from trying. And it was rough. It wasn't fun. It was a hard moment. Am I right?
Absolutely, Becky. And I very hard moment in our relationship, in the relationship between the West Slope and the state. But I want to point out that Becky didn't give up, and I didn't give up. And I think Becky's leadership is extremely important to our state. Working through differences is important. Sometimes it's not pretty. but it can be good. We're getting the little notices here from our staff that they really want
Zane
this.
said we can ignore those.
Okay, yeah, I heard that too. I do want to say the next panel is going to be really, I think, a really fun one, but I got to ask Becky to give you all and give us an update on the negotiations. And I want to say, you know, Becky gets a lot of flack, the other commissioners get a lot of flack in the press for having these discussions behind closed doors. Well, anybody who's been involved in a negotiation with large public impact consequences understands that if you have to do everything in public, what you get is a bunch of position taking and people digging their heels in, and you don't give anybody any room for compromise. Is the federal government coming to mind again, you know, or Congress? So a big fan of transparency in government, but in negotiations, it's important to keep it a large part of that quiet. I guess I want to ask you, Becky, what can you tell us about those negotiations? Do you have hope that we will reach an agreement? That I think I do agree with Jay Weiner. It's a much better solution if we have a negotiated agreement between the parties that take in all of the interests. So where are we headed?
Absolutely. I mean, this is the news piece, so catch this, Alan, okay? I do have hope. I think we all know that we are better as 7 basin states. I think I heard Jay talk about there's hope if one's on the outside, and it could be Colorado or it could be Arizona. That sounded a bit like a threat, but I want to say something as it relates to that. The upper basin states are bound by a compact. That's different than what's happening in the lower basin. We are bound together. And we have a way that we have to operate together because of that compact. I would highly suggest the lower basin states think about that. I don't think they want to, but I think it is something that binds us together. I am hopeful of a 7-state consensus. Why? Because the alternative is not great. And I think we've kicked the can. We're at the end of the road. There's a lot of cans. And I think we have an opportunity to show leadership. So in terms of the status of the negotiations, we're meeting. It is not enjoyable. I want to be perfectly honest. We're meeting about every other week. Primarily, it's in person. Sometimes a single day, sometimes multiple days. Jay got it right. The issues are a lot the same. When we talked about a supply-driven system or a natural flow proposal, ultimately the crux is how much water is there, and what does that look like? In the natural flow proposal, the upper basin put aside a few big things. One being the look at the tributaries, and you heard Andy talk about how much water is in those tributaries, how much that helps in the lower basin. And we put aside some storage things to even look at that proposal. A supply-based proposal is the only way to move forward. We all have to be responding to supply. I talked a little bit as we talked about the prior appropriation system. There is a structure of the way that we respond to supply in the upper basin. But I still go into these meetings with the goals of rebuilding storage. Why? Because we've lost 50 million acre feet of storage in the term of these guidelines. That doesn't work. We know it doesn't work. Let's learn from that. So we also need to provide flexibility. And I think I heard that from the conservation groups, from the lower basin. Everybody wants flexibility, so we have to figure out how to do that. We also need to meet the demands and the needs of the basin tribal nations and their communities. I think Jay was right. We have a lot in common when it goes to that. We need to provide an opportunity to set aside legal arguments. Those legal arguments, we feel like we set some of that aside just by looking at some of what we're looking at. We also need to set aside building an operations plan that meets the needs as they are currently. We need to let go of that dream and be able to figure out how to respond. And I think that's been a bit of a struggle. So that involves us creating a mechanism that allows the upper basin and the lower basin to manage within available supplies. We both have to do that. And we can't have anything that suggests a delivery obligation or really hit on those major compact issues. We have different views of the compact. We're going to have to fall somewhere between that. And we understand that. We understand that. And so we have proposed multiple ideas on how to look at a supply-driven system and are going to continue to do that. It feels a little bit like we're in a game of bring me another rock right now, and we're continuing that. And we will continue it. We can't give up. And I sat in the back for the last panel, and oftentimes, and you heard Andy touch on it, about I take a lot of flack. It's not enjoyable, but when I look out here, each and every one of you is worth it. I know that the decisions and the thoughts that I bring to the table are not my own. They are yours. And I'm going to get a little cheesy. Can I 1 minute of cheesy?
Just one?
Just one. But, and I think I want to be empathetic to the lower basin. Living within the means of the river is difficult if you haven't done it. It's a hard thing to grasp. And we want to support them through that process. And that means us too. Like we've never said we're not going to be doing things. We will. We have always said that. In our original alternative, we put things on the table. But these times are difficult. These times are difficult. They are difficult. It is for you. And it is for the future generations. And I got a quote sent to me, and I don't think he's in this room, but I'll often get inspiring mail. Like not even an email, like real hard mail, like old school mail. And I happened to get one yesterday. And I thought, this is perfect. And I didn't know how bad or how ugly yesterday was going to be, but there's always light. But it was a water user and saying, I'm still with you. I'm with you. I see what you're going through. I see what they're saying about not just you as a person, but all of Colorado. And the quote, the Thomas Paine quote that he sent was almost perfect. And he said, Thomas Paine said, I prefer peace, but if trouble must come, let it be in my time so my children can live in peace.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Commissioner. Something for us all to think about. All right. Thank you.